I'm Damian the DM from Adventures in Aurelia, a collaborative storytelling experience told through a game of Dungeons & Dragons, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other epically geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 306 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we talk about hobby podcaster gear in 2024. And in this week's Ponderings, topics include the Podcast Addict podcast listening app, an AI-generated podcast update, and a note on a free hosting site. And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we discuss the great conversation from the Better Podcasting Discord community. Lauren, let's rev it up and let's get the show started.
This is Better Podcasting. We are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Better Podcasting. This is episode 306. I am Stephen, and I am pleased to say the person you are actually tuning in for is here. He's SP.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I hope your podcasting week was as exciting as mine was. We'll get into that later. It was also exciting for Stephen. We got a lot to talk about this week. But first, we have a actual I can't say how I saved my podcast story, but we do have a input for our How I Saved My Podcast Story segment. Stephen, you ready with that audio?
Here's another How I Saved My Podcast story.
Hey, Better Podcast listeners. I'm taking the liberty of deciding that this is not going to be a How I Saved My Podcast story. It is going to be a current tense how I am saving my podcast story because the drama is still going on. Recently, I'm having issues with my computer. I'm hoping the motherboard died. If you want to hear more about that, then I have an episode in the Play Comics feed of what's going on there. But the thing that you are all here for is the how I am saving my podcast story. Present tense. Presence, get it? Because being able to do a podcast like this and have a place to share it is a present. My wife has a pretty good laptop, and she let me use it to record Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. recently, and I am very grateful that she let me do that. She let me install OBS and Road Central and anything else that I needed, but I think that was all I needed to install anyway. And I also have a cheapo ThinkPad. It's an 11E, and I got it for like $70. And the reason that I got it was because it was $70 and I could sit out on the couch with her and do stupid little things in there instead of having to come into my big monster machine that is definitely not portable out into the living room. So right now I'm recording this onto my Rodecaster Duo, which, having that is also saving my podcast. I am going to be able to send this recording to SP and to Stephen. And one of them, I presume, will actually listen to it before they play it on the show. And also, I can still do Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff through this because all I have to do is show up and record. It's great. But the fact that I even have this equipment that I have that lets me record outside of the computer, I have a computer that is good enough to get me able to talk to my other co-hosts on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I have, external monitors I can plug in. I have cheap mice that I kept just for emergencies. And Kaylee said I was stupid, but hey, I'm going to have a mouse and not use the trackpad on here. That's great. I love it. I'm not going to edit on this thing, but maybe I can get some kind of like mailbag episodes or something, something where I can come in and just talk off the top of my head and not have to edit, throw up a little bit in my mouth as I'm putting up something onto the internet unedited. But, that's better than sitting there in silence and having the feed completely empty, I guess. So again, if you can have a way to work without all of your primary equipment, then having that is a blessing. take advantage of it. I was always somebody who said, man, I can record on my computer. Why would I ever want to record on a dedicated recording device? And then, I don't know, right now I'm so happy I have this Rodecaster, because without that, I would be completely dead in the water instead of just treading water while I wait for all of my new equipment to come in and actually having time to essentially put an entirely new system together, because it's a motherboard and I'm going to have to unhook everything. But yeah, have equipment, make it fun.
Thanks, Chris, for sending that to us. If you didn't gather, that was Chris, also known as Waffles, from Play Comics over on the Gonna Geek Network. Please check that out at gonnageek.com. Play Comics is a wonderful podcast, and yeah, there's definitely an episode in the latest, or the latest episode in the feed of his talks about those problems that he was having. Now, I am so glad you sent this in, because it addresses a couple things I think is going to fit nicely into the segment that we're talking about today with gear. And one of the things that I just want to mention is the independent hardware like this is nice, because it's just a layer of protection. If you do have a dependency on your computer for recording, you still could get by. We've actually talked about this before when we've had internet connections go down, which is essentially like our computer not working. You still could theoretically, if both sides have hardware recorders, find a way to talk to those people alternatively, like maybe you do a phone call or something, and you both record on your own side. And I love that in this case here, he's got a huge problem with his computer, and he's able to keep going in some level. Now, editing, of course, is a challenge, as he mentioned. But one of the other things I think is neat to think about here is the fact that some of this new hardware equipment does technically hook up to mobile devices. So if you have a modern mobile device, you could possibly bring that into your mobile device if your hardware recorder that you're using is mobile compatible and you have a mobile compatible device that will work with that. So, you know, it just seems like it, even though things might go wrong and you're not in your ideal setup, the world of podcast equipment has evolved so much that there is alternatives to keep yourself going at maybe at a reduced capacity, but you can still keep going. So it's pretty cool.
I know Chris is very keen on keeping that content rolling. So once he started and dropped the episode that I heard over on Play Comics, I was very grateful that he took advantage of a sale earlier this year on the Rodecaster Duo. That's why he has it. There was a sale on it. It was a lot reduced from where it normally is. And he was a big proponent of just recording everything over his computer, of mixing everything on his computer. And now he is seeing the advantage of doing all of that on his board, because that's all he has, at least for now. I think he'll be back up in another week or two. We'll see what kind of content he drops between now and then, but I think it's very successful. It's been successful on his show. He was able to send us feedback on this show, and it was successful on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. And as he talked about, he was borrowing his wife's laptop, but it was good enough to connect and record. And we'll talk about how we're doing Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. now, and it handled everything just fine. So my congratulations are out to Chris that his backup is actually working. Could it go down? Yeah, it could, but he's going to be back up on his Prime hopefully very soon. And who knows, maybe he'll keep that audio from his Rodecaster in his final product going forward.
I would also, before we go to our featured segment, like to highlight that he was wrong. He said that it wasn't a how I saved my podcast. It's a how he's saving his podcast. Now, here's the thing. He has dropped an episode in his feed since it went wrong. Thus, he has released a new episode of his podcast. Thus, you have saved your podcast. Pat yourself on the back, Chris. You did more than you thought you did.
Indeed. And talking about doing more than we thought we did, let's go over these very extensive show notes.
Over the last 2 decades of podcasting, there has been a tremendous advancement in gear for podcasters and creators. And specifically, there's been a lot of gear developed that is designed to make it as easy as possible for podcasters, which is, of course, very helpful for hobby podcasters. While podcasting gear had been slowly evolving over the years, the phase of podcasting that arose during the pandemic really opened up the floodgates to podcasting gear and made things more accessible to everyone, and also dueled as better working from home technology as such. The timing of this seemed to be the perfect mix because big money had just come into the podcast space a couple years before, and companies had been working for a couple years to also get a sweet piece of that Rodecaster Pro boom money. So there was some development happening in equipment on that side. So these two things together ended up leading to this sort of perfect mix of new gear that suddenly seemed to take the podcast space by storm during the pandemic years. Now, a little side note, we did interview personnel in charge of developing during this period of equipment development, and we got some insights to how these companies were developing the equipment. So that was kind of fun for us to be a part of interviewing people during that boom that was happening in the podcast equipment space.
Now, it's been a couple of years since we covered podcast gear in general, outside of our annual gear episodes. And spoilers, there's one coming in a month or so for this year. So we thought we'd take an episode of Better Podcasting and focus on what's available for hobby podcasters today, what our recommendations are to make your show sound the best, and perhaps help your show from losing a recording or stream along the way, like we just heard. And before we get into the thick of today's episode, we need to acknowledge a change that has happened since the last time we've talked about podcast gear. Getting back to our aforementioned comment about the floodgates opening during the pandemic, we want to acknowledge that during this time, people got really creative with how they started creating content. Gear availability was really scarce in the 2020-2021 time period, so people had started creating content through equipment that wasn't traditionally part of the podcast sphere. While this partially was emphasized by the fact that mainstream media production was also scrambling to find at-home needs and was using equipment that may not have previously been up to the, at the time, established standards for in-the-studio work. So because of this, listener expectations changed a little bit for what they thought a podcast might sound like. They became more understanding of lower quality or alternative recording means. As such, in today's episode, you may hear us talk about some things that we previously have discounted. So, Stephen, what are we going to kick this whole thing off with?
Let's start talking about something that's super techie, super nerdy. It's the internet! Get your wwws ready, get on your interwebs, let's talk all about it, because however you choose to podcast, you're going to probably need some form of internet connection, because podcasting is an internet-based medium. That is what a podcast is. So this is an absolute requirement that you need to have for podcasting is an internet connection. But what type of internet connection you have will really vary on your podcast and how you do your podcast as well. If you plan on doing a solo audio show or maybe even podcasting with a team that's recording locally in person, you don't really need to put as much thought of your internet connection as you might if you were doing something with people remotely. So with people who are working primarily locally or by yourself, MP3 files are really going to be your big thing that you're doing with the internet function of your podcasting, and they're not that large to upload, meaning that your primary need that you're focusing on for podcasting in this situation is uploading your files when you're done podcasting. There are some other considerations that you still would want to have in this situation, however, and that includes other internet activities that might be related to your podcast endeavors, such as creating posts for your podcast, maybe uploading or downloading graphics, handling promotional materials such as videos, maybe some social media activity that might tie into your podcast if you do wish to engage in that. Basically, the internet activities that surround your podcast to help build up your podcast brand. But in the year 2024, let's be a little real about this here. If you are primarily recording your podcast in an offline manner, there's probably not a lot of consideration you actually have to put into these additional needs, because we think that in the year 2024, there's a reasonable assumption that if you've chosen podcasting as your hobby, it's likely you already have some form of internet presence on some basic level. you likely already have an internet-connected device, like a phone, where you probably spend some form of reasonable amount of time engaging in internet activities. Even things like just YouTube video consumption. Maybe you go a little more and you do engage in social media or doing mindless scrolling on things like YouTube and TikTok. It's okay. We're guilty of the mindless scrolling occasionally too ourselves.
Well, Stephen is.
I am. So in all likelihood, if you've chosen to podcast as your hobby, we think in the year 2024, you probably have enough of an internet connection for these surrounding activities if you are mostly doing a local or solo show. But it can get more complicated if you're not.
If you record to an online capability, if you record with some geographically separated co-hosts, or you interview guests that are not in the room with you, or you stream your content, you're going to need to put some more thought into your internet connection than just having something available. You'll want a somewhat robust internet connection that's capable of more functionality. This might be outgoing 1080 or even 4K streams if you're doing video. Now, keep in mind, this might not mean your podcast is in video. One of the biggest connection changes that happen in recent years is the familiarity and comfort of people with video conferencing solutions. A lot more people are used to having video when they chat with others. People see the benefits of seeing each other when they converse. And if you're used to seeing people while you chat, it becomes awkward when you go back to audio only, especially in group scenarios. As such, it's very beneficial to see each other when you record, even if you're only posting the audio in the end. eCaster is an example of an audio recording platform that allows you to see the other end as you're recording. And we've discussed the visual speaking cues when talking to others on the show before. It is a benefit. So you need to consider what is required to have a reliable connection when recording, because if your connection is flaky, it'll make your recording session more difficult, a lot more over speaking, and perhaps some awkward pauses where somebody else could have jumped in if they just recognized the other person was done speaking. As such, from a technical aspect, we suggest you have an internet that is at least 25 megabits per second on the upload side and at least 100 megabits per second on the download side. Now, we know that's not always possible, but that's a really good starting point. The reason we'd recommend being around this range or higher, allows you for activities to happen at the same time that you're using your internet connection to podcast. Especially important if others are going to be using the internet connection while you record, say like family members that are gaming in 4K or such. So the reality is that 25 megabits per second might not actually be enough to sustain a stable connection while recording if you have multiple users doing things like the gaming that I said, or high-end upload needs, or you have multiple people that are streaming 4K download, watching a football game or something like that. But again, what we're talking about is just a starting point. But in many places in North America, you can probably go higher. For example, something like 500 megabits per second down and 100 megabits per second is achievable for a lot of people in North America, but it even gets better than that. The current flagship technology for internet connection is based on fiber. And no, we're not talking about oatmeal. We're talking about the fiber optical connections that the internet seems to run on in a lot of places right now. And with that fiber becoming more and more common, the internet speeds can get even better. We, both Stephen and I, both have symmetrical gigabit connections. And that means we both have connections that can both upload and download 1,000 megabits per second simultaneously. Quite honestly, this is a bit of an overkill for the recording aspect that we even do, but there are some benefits that come with it for podcast production elsewise, such as faster upload and downloads of larger files, such as WAV files, and those 12 to 20 megabit or gigabit video files that I do for Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. And the last thing that we'll mention is that you may find that non-traditional internet might work for your recording in 2024. Now, what are we talking about here? Particularly, we're referring to your phone connection on LTE or higher, like 5G, or even Starlink satellite. There are a lot of content creators that I follow on YouTube that have Starlink connections that they put on their sailboats, for instance. We say may work because there are some challenges that come up with both of these solutions, including reliability and consistency, and also the terms latency and jitter come into fruition at the same time. Both of these can have the potential to fluctuate drastically, and as such, that means you may find one recording session is great, but the next might be full of lag or other inconsistencies. I have watched live streams from some of these sailing YouTube channels that I follow, and they are using Starlink, and on 1 second, they're doing fine, and then when the boat moves a little bit, and it has to do with alignment to the satellite, then all of a sudden it just goes to poop and you can hardly see or hear them.
So what'd you say? It goes to poop?
Goes to poop.
So like they don't have fiber, or they do have fiber. Now you're confusing me.
No, they don't have fiber, and it's not as consistent.
Oh, fair enough.
Okay. But the technology for internet and other means has improved a lot in recent years, or in Starlink's case, it's just being developed now, that these might be capable enough for recording an internet-based podcast. Matter of fact, I was listening to a podcast that the podcaster was actually at McMurdo Station in Antarctica, and he was connecting via their joint Starlink connection. So that's an example of something that can be done. But they might not either be available based on your specific location or services nearby. There are other internet connection considerations that you might have, but we don't want to get too boring so early in the segment. So come chat with us on our Discord and we'll talk about your specific issues that you might be having.
And if you need to talk about your fiber needs, just come over there too. We'll create a channel. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about computer and mobile devices, because while recording, streaming, editing, and publishing from your mobile device is possible, the modern technological mobile marvels have yet to really broach the line for us to recommend them solidly for hobby podcasters. This became especially clear for us last season while we were looking at different media hosts and all-in-one solutions and coming up dry, finding not a lot of support for that. It was very clear that there wasn't a ton of mobile support in this capacity, so we still are not able to fully recommend mobile podcasting at this time. But if you do, however, want to try to embark on this and podcast a little bit from a mobile device, we would strongly recommend you pair this with a recording device such as a Zoom P4 or a Zoom handheld device or something like that, some form of small hardware recorder that you can pair with that mobile device so that you do have better and more reliable, hopefully, microphone control, monitor capability, and also for backup purposes. Because again, we think that the mobile sphere still isn't the greatest as far as what a hobby podcaster can rely on. There are some solutions that you may have if you are only going to record on your mobile device if that is necessary, such as you might only have the capability of having your phone and very limited equipment with you. It's like in-field interviews. At this point, neither of us are hugely wild about what these offerings are out there. We don't have a ton of experience, so we're not going to recommend any specifics. But if you do want to do this sort of thing and you do want to put caution to the wind and say, I really want to use my mobile device, come to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. There are people in our Discord that do have experience with some of these devices that connect to mobile phones and whatnot directly. And I'm sure someone will have a suggestion for you.
But for the most part, we would highly encourage you to center your podcast production around a desktop or a laptop. For audio recording, most modern Windows or Mac desktops or laptop computers should be able to record and produce your show. However, some connection capabilities like Riverside have minimum system requirements now to connect and record, and it's down to the CPU core level. We highlight modern because both Windows and Mac have started to implement some hard stops as far as legacy technology goes. On Windows, you need to have a modern computer to get Windows 11, for instance. There are system specifics that you need in order to upgrade to Windows 11 or to place Windows 11 on your computer. On the Mac, pre-Apple Silicon M1 Macs and MacBooks are starting to see a lack of support. Now, both of these situations mean that older technology for podcasting may start running into hard stops if you're on that dated equipment. And if you're not seeing it yet, in the near future, when we're talking months to just a year or two, you might be seeing some of that degradation. Now, for video recording, you're going to need a little bit more than your standard computing technology, including advanced processing and graphics capabilities. You're going to need to spend more money on your computer, as the basics will likely lead into some difficulties. This is on both Mac and Windows machines. And if you missed it, last year, Stephen experimented with a Mac, and during this, he ran some tests. And quite frankly, he has no idea how people can recommend an 8 gigabyte Mac for any remotely advanced needs. 16 seems likely barely enough for video at the current time. And when I'm talking to people, I say grab as much of that active memory as you possibly can afford, because you're going to need it today. Plus, if you're spending that money on a Mac, you're likely to have it for 5-7 years. So you're definitely going to need it in the future. Stephen, do you have anything that you want to say about this?
I would just say that it seems to be evolving very quickly on the Mac side of things as well. So just know that some of the information that's out there is probably a little dated, because it's only been a few years that the Mac processors, the Mac Apple Silicon's been out there. So things changed drastically when Mac did end up creating their own processors. And so some of the information that's out there is dated. And this includes some of the software needs that are out there and what is supported and whatnot. So just keep that in mind. Information of yesteryear might not be reflective of today.
Moving on to other capabilities, Surface tablets, Chromebooks, and other what we'll call light computer devices might run into USB driver issues to connect your gear, processing power issues, and multiple task capability limitations. With that said, if you're using an external audio device, more to come to that in a minute, these tablets may be more than sufficient for you to establish a connection for recording. But primarily, if you have no on-computer recording needs and just want to be able to chat with the other people who are you recording with, and you have alternative ways to get the recordings, such as through everyone recording on hardware recordings on their own site. So do you need a computer to record? Not in all cases, but separate offboard gear such as the handheld Zoom or Tascam recorders, or standalone mixer recorders such as the Rodecaster or DLZ Creator Series can be used to record in the same room. All right, Stephen, let's move on to the actual act of recording.
For sure. Let's talk about microphones. That's a good place to start. We are still big proponents of having every speaker, every participant in your podcast, having their own dynamic microphone recorded to their own track where possible. This starts to limit possibilities down from hundreds to dozens if you are going to do that, though. But we still have a few of the recommendations for microphones, and we want to talk about a few specific ones to highlight their sound reliability, affordability, and some durability for these specific units. Now, the category we'll start with, the microphones for a hobby podcaster, would be USB and XLR microphones. These are great for any hobby podcaster, but we highlight them for traveling, for maybe a backup microphone, and also keeping in mind that they are easy to upgrade from if you are starting your journey with them. They're versatile all-around microphones because they have multiple functionalities. Personally, we would recommend staying away from USB-only microphones, because a USB-only microphone will prevent you from having more advanced interface or audio mixer capabilities down the road if you do need that. So in the USB and XLR combination category, we would highlight the ATR 2100X, the Samson Q2U, the Audio-Technica ATR 2005, if you can find that, of course, and the Shure MV7 Plus, which is a bit of a hot topic because the MV7 Plus is a combination USB and XLR microphone and is based off of the Shure MV7X, which was created as a basic XLR only microphone. And some people on this podcast might think that the MV7 Plus doesn't sound as good as the MV7X SP, but it is a microphone that we would still put our eyes on if you are looking for this category, because it does have its own benefits. And the last one we'd throw in here is the Rode PodMic USB. I know. The PodMic USB is new. It does have USB and XLR, but the PodMic in general is the one that got its name when it blew up, but it's XLR only. So we'll call it the USB version.
Now, why did we call out staying away from USB-only microphones? Well, in the last couple of years, multiple popular budget mics have created additional SKUs that allow for both XLR and USB. The Shure MV7 Plus and the PodMic USB are examples. So we'd encourage to spend a few extra bucks up front and future-proof yourself than being tied to USB only. I don't know how many posts that I've seen in the r/podcasting Discord of people trying to connect multiple USB microphones. And one of the mods there, Bangs, keeps on coming back that multiple USB microphones is a road to pain and suffering, because inevitably there's something that goes wrong with doing that. So we would agree with that. And just to keep you sane as you're moving forward in your podcasting, get something that also has a XLR connection. And I think you're going to be thanking yourself down the road when you do that. Alternatively, you can use handheld dynamic microphones in addition to the microphones that we just talked about. They're great for live recording. You can interview in public places like cons, and that's the geek word, for conventions, or as less expensive guest supplemental microphones. We've talked about the Shure SM58 being an all-around great microphone. It's even been frozen and thawed out, and it works. Not us, it was a test done by Shure. The Sennheiser MD46 interview microphone, I will to this day say that is the best handheld microphone you can ever get for a hobby podcaster. It is a little pricey, but when you're talking about reducing the ambient sound, if you're in a noisy background place, it is an amazing microphone. I was told by one professional podcaster that I recommended that microphone to. He said, we had the best sounding recordings from that event because we used that microphone. And that's literally what happened. If you want more specifics on that, come to our Discord server and I'll gladly tell you everything that happened there. Also, the SE Electronic V7 microphone is pretty good. But if you don't require the actual benefits of handheld microphones in the year 2024, we find it hard to justify these solutions with the alternatives available today. Now, Stephen, if you only need XLR, there are some dynamic studio and streaming podcasting microphones that are under $200 that we would recommend.
Absolutely. And we'll call it the Zoom ZDM1 or ZDM1 if you'd prefer. It's actually about $50 on sale usually, and that's a pretty good price. There's also the Rode PodMic XLR and the Shure MV7X, which is not the USB version. And all three of those are really affordable and are examples of how much the landscape has changed for the hobby podcaster needs in the microphone world since we last really covered this topic, because these are so affordable options that are studio style dynamic broadcast microphones. And those come with their own benefits. And again, for a great price tag.
If you want to spend a little bit more, you can look into what is termed as the broadcasting large dynamic microphones. That's predominantly what Steve and I have been using throughout most of the run of Better Podcasting. We're talking about microphones like the Rode Procaster, the Shure SM7B, which I'm using right now, the Audio-Technica BP40, an Electro Voice RE320, which I used for years, the Electro Voice RE20, and the SE Electronics Dynacaster. They're all great microphones ranging from upper $200s to $500. And to be honest with you, they're what a lot of radio stations use. They don't really use anything bigger than that because, they have to stay on budget. And if it's good enough for them, good enough to hear in your car, it's good enough for me to hear on a podcast. So there you go. And then moving forward, there is a little bit of back and forth on whether shotgun microphones are actually worth it or not. But if you want to venture into that realm, I would recommend the Sennheiser MKH416. It's about $1,000. And Rode makes a couple of them, the NTG4 and the NTG5, which might be worth checking out. So if you absolutely want to go down that path of a shotgun microphone, those are the ones that I would recommend. And Stephen, why didn't we mention any of the Elgato products?
Yeah, I'll admit, I put this point in our show document here because I wanted to bring this up because we have a lot of chat in our Discord server about Elgato products. Elgato's been doing a lot of content creation, hardware creation, I'll call it that, for a while here, where they've added a whole bunch of stuff available, and some of that includes microphones. And quite frankly, what we have seen with the Elgato stuff, we haven't found the use cases for hobby podcasters that it would check those check marks that we aforementioned and basically meet the needs that we would recommend for hobby podcasters. They could be cheap enough for certain people, but then it starts to not fit into our criteria of what we would recommend if somebody is going to be getting into podcasting and picking up equipment for the first time. And we have a criteria that we think makes for a good sounding podcast. So far, a lot of the products have been USB only driven, and the XLR one that's coming to my mind honestly doesn't sound great. A lot of people have done reviews on it, and I think there's better alternatives out there. So at the moment, you might see a lot of splashy talk out there about the Elgato microphone products. We don't see how it fits in better than what we've talked about today.
All right, moving on to recording, we're going to talk about handheld recorders first. Just in the past year, we've seen a refresh of the handheld recorder market. Let's start off with some of the highlights of the improvements that are available. We're talking about 32-bit float. A lot of people say that's great because it's hard to actually clip using 32-bit float. And if you're using a handheld recorder on the run in a convention sort of aspect or field recording, that's probably a good thing for you. There's also updated displays. Some of the displays looked like they were from the 90s, and they've been updated to more interactive touch displays with colors and a lot more easily discernible and bigger. And the ability to use as an interface while recording, that was a bane of the H8 that I don't recommend for hobby podcasters because it does have a podcasting mode, but it does not have that ability to be used as an audio interface while recording. So like it's just a local recording machine basically at that point. And also better preamps. Those seem to be the collective improvements with this next generation of handheld recorders. Not all of the new generation of recorders have all of these improvements, but it's nice to see the trends going forward. Some of the examples that we're seeing that we have recommended before and we would continue to recommend, the Zoom Essentials line. This is an upgrade from the Zoom handheld recorders, and it's called the H1 Essential, the H4 Essential, and the H6 Essential. They're all improvements over the original line and the Pro line. So it's like the third generation of these.
Can I just say, by the way, that they failed at the name because Essential sounds like it's like a step down from the previous generation. And from everything I've seen, it's a step up. So I think it's a weird name on that, but
definitely. Zoom also has the original H1 and the H1 XLR now, the F3 field recorder, and the H8. Talked about that enough. Zoom also has the very versatile PodTrack P4, which stands out in the entire field because of its capability to have 4 headphones out in addition to the 4 microphone XLR connections in, and the ability to record and use as an audio interface, despite not having 32-bit float or modernized preamps yet. I actually expect the PodTrack P4 to be upgraded within the next year. I don't know what's going on at Zoom. I have no inside information whatsoever. I just see what's going on, and I would expect them to upgrade that capability since it is such a gem capability for hobby podcasters. Now, Tascam has also upped its game recently with a few new offerings with 32-bit float. We're talking about the FR ACV2, the Portacapture X6, and the Portacapture X8. Tascam still offers the DR10X, which can turn any handheld microphone into an interview microphone without any cords. Now, there's no monitoring off of that, and I have heard people that have lost their recordings because they've set the gain incorrectly, basically too high. It's not 32-bit float, but it's an availability to literally have that microphone in your hand, like the Sennheiser MD46, not connected to anything, and actually get the recording off of. It's useful in field recordings situations, especially in its priced for a hobby podcaster that can use it. Now, with that said, you're a hobby podcaster, and now is where we do our version of what?
Well, we're going to do our version of Judge Marilyn Million's patented People's Court common sense, quote, rough justice, end quote. I love the People's Court, okay? I've watched it since I was a kid. So let's get to the bottom line here and call out the middle ground of all of this. Because yes, a lot of these upgrades are very beneficial, but you also could make a case that you may not necessarily need them. There is a lot of benefits to the 32-bit float. The SP's just gone over some of them, and you will hear people singing these praises from the rooftops because when they need those benefits, they're very beneficial. But on the other side of things, you need to consider a little bit that from a straight up quality perspective, your audio in the end will end up being lower quality because it's going to be in an MP3. And if you can work with the equipment you have to avoid some of these things, these challenges, you may find some room there to save yourself some money and maybe pick up an older generation product if it still is on the market. The products that we used for a while, things like the Zoom H6 that don't have these improved capabilities, they produced very high quality products for us for a very long time. And sometimes you can still find them out there, even on the used market as well. So you need to look for yourself of what's going to fit yours the best and know that there are definite benefits to the newest generation, but you don't necessarily need to dismiss the previous generation of some of these products out there because they are proven. So you got to make the decision that works for you.
All right, we're going to move on now from the microphones to what you plug the microphones into. And we're going to start out with a category of devices called USB audio interfaces. Now, since audio interfaces don't actually produce a backup recording or even a primary audio recording, we find it difficult to recommend this class of device for hobby podcasters. However, if this is your preferred methodology to connect your microphone to your computer or mobile device, we do have a few that we can recommend for fellow hobbies. These devices have decent preamps and have been noted to be reliable. So we're going to talk about the Moto M2, the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, now it's in 4th generation, the Solid State Logic SSL2, the Audient EVO 4 and EVO 8, and the Arturia Mini Fuse 4. There are a few devices that designed to work with mobile devices as well, such as the IK Multimedia iRig Pro Duo. They also make a singular one, but if you're going to do that, might as well get the Duo so you can record 2 people into it. So those are some recommendations that we can make from the audio USB interface realm.
Now, moving on to the big kid on the block, the combination mixer and recorders. These are the things that will do what I just said together, mix and record. Basically, they're your Rodecaster Pros. We don't need to explain too much about this. We'll make this category very straightforward. The products that we would shout out from a current generation is the Rodecaster Pro 2, the Rodecaster Duo, the Tascam Mixcast, the Mackie DLZ Creator, and the Mackie DLZ Creator XS. However, we would say that at this time, you probably want to wait for the next generation if you can, because we have expressed many times the problems we have seen with the current generation. So we are personally recommending you wait for the next one. And if you really need to jump into it, you can choose one of those ones, or maybe even consider, if you can find one, a Rodecaster Pro 1, because if you can deal with the quality limitations that are in there, we have actually known some people who have gone to the Rodecaster Pro 2 and said they wish they kept their 1. So you might be able to save yourself some money and maybe find that as a stepping stone, but we're not wild about what's on the market right now.
Now, Stephen, you were talking in the handheld recorder realm that if you don't have the money for any of these, and this is a solution you want, there might be some older generation things, like you just mentioned the Rodecaster Pro 1. Well, there's the Zoom P8 recorder that is out there right now, and that one doesn't have the ability to draw effects into the channels. So you might get lower quality recordings from it, but it is available. It has multiple XLR ins and multiple headphones out. So it is out there right now and could be added to that list at a lower cost option. So just pointing that out.
I'll also throw out the long-standing Zoom L8 and Zoom L12, which technically still meets those, but with a lot less processing again. So those might be something that you consider as well if you just need the mixing and recording capabilities.
And our third co-host for Better Podcasting, Damian, has also thrown in the chat that we got a new L6 out there as well, which I haven't looked into, but it still doesn't raise to the level of the Rodecaster Pros, where you have the all-in-one mixer audio recorder thing. So I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that amongst anything, but right now we're really in the mode of waiting for the next generation of stuff. So you said it right there. Okay, moving on. Wireless systems. Wow. How have we not talked about wireless systems, Stephen?
Quite frankly, because we don't recommend them for podcasting. Like that's the bottom line, is we struggle to see where they fit in, but we do see that some people might be looking for this. We're not a big fan because you get things like crosstalk, shirt rustles, and other issues that affect the quality. But if you are somebody that's looking, we would say just turn to the Rode Wireless series. The Rode Wireless series has a lot of products out there, and we would say look at that because a lot of content creators that have chosen this route, not necessarily podcasters, are using them. And neither of us are huge about the sound that they produce, but because of their availability, because of their support, because there is information out there that you can get, that's probably what we would suggest as a hobby podcaster. If you really want to go that way, you can go that way. The other category that's sort of similar is broadcast headsets that, again, we struggle to recommend, but do acknowledge there might be a use out there, especially if your co-host just can't stay on microphone and needs the ability to walk around or stretch or do, or just feel like they're commentating on the latest NFL game. You know, there's many reasons why you might, but again, we're not the biggest fan, but we do have a couple affordable options, or relatively affordable options in this category. SP, what are those?
The Rode NTH100M. We've talked about it before, the Audio-Technica BPHS1, the Shure BRH440M LC, and the Sennheiser HMD300. Those kind of rise in cost from the lowest to the highest. But in the end, we think that the audio does leave a lot to be desired. So if you do want to use these and you really need to, yeah, you're going to have to play with it a little bit. And I would recommend looking at some of the inexpensive broadcast style microphones that we previously mentioned. The advancement in recent years of creating an affordable broadcast style microphone, I'll throw the ZDM1 out there again, has really limited the scope of why a hobby podcaster might need a headset microphone. But some people know that they're available and that's what they want to do for whatever reason. Now, moving on to headphones. As far as headphones go, we know it is very subjective. And there's even a preference between in-ear monitoring for video streaming and full studio monitoring over-the-ear headphones, as we see right here on Better Podcasting. Stephen, contrary to what you think, he is using in-ear monitors right now. And you can clearly see if you're watching the video that I'm using over-the-ear full studio monitoring headphones. But we both agree it's a good idea to monitor your recording and have a separation between the audio that you're hearing and the audio going into your microphone, especially if you're recording geographically separated while we're doing. You should be comfortable wearing them, and you should be able to distinguish sounds while you're listening through them. Now, the prime reason we don't generally recommend open back headphones is I own a pair of them. The AKG K240s. Yeah, I used them once. It happened to be the podcast that I needed to monitor very well. I couldn't hear it, and I screwed up a recording on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I have no interest of ever wearing them again. Now, they do have benefits if you're just wearing headphones and you want airflow over your ears for long periods of time. But as far as recording, there's audio bleed, and you're not going to be able to hear as well as a closed back headphone situation. So that's why I don't recommend them. But given the fact that we are going to recommend over-the-ear headphones, here are a few recommendations. We do recognize, like I said, that things are subjective, both from the comfortability of the wearing and the actual audio that you hear from them. So the Sony MDR 7506s, the Shure SRH 840As. I've recommended these to multiple co-hosts and people that have asked for recommendations. I will call out 4 different people right now. Beef over on Legends Podcast, Michelle, my co-host on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., Sean and Shannon, some co-hosts on Artie's Attic, and Wing, the original podcaster for Starling Tribune, Legends Podcast, and Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., and they all just love them. Now, if you can't afford the 840As, the Shure SRH 440s are good with the 840A cups. Steven's tried that before. I have not used the Rode NTH 100s yet, but I have heard a couple of people be a little bit surprised at what they are for the cost. They are north of $100 right now in the $150 range. So they're available. And there are the Audio-Technica ATH-M 50Xs. We've talked about them before. We're going to note that it's pretty polarizing with our audience from both a comfort perspective and an audio monitoring perspective, because it does have a lower frequency enhanced sound. So just want to throw that out there. Now, Stephen, you're the guy that uses in-ear monitors. Why don't you take this?
Sure, yeah. I've compiled a very large list here. So my list includes the Shure SE215s.
Okay.
That's the list. Yeah, just
Okay.
the one. And honestly, the reason I'm going to recommend just the 215s is because for a hobby podcaster, I have not found anything that beats the price point, beats the functionality with the 215s. A lot of the cheaper ones out there, they aren't as good. They're all-in-one units. They're non-standard units. It's hard to find support for OEM accessories if you need to replace parts, which is the complete opposite of the Shure SE215s. You can buy new cables for them while keeping the ear speaker pieces. I've done that. You can buy the original tips so that you keep the same quality. I've done that with things like the Sennheiser ones that I tried. Couldn't find original tips, so they ended up changing the sound. So quite honestly, I've not seen anything yet that makes me go, why would I choose anything in that price point as a hobby podcaster outside of the SE215s? There's just a lot of cons with the alternative. So if you're looking there, that would be my recommendation of where you start. Yes, you could go higher. Yes, there's better products out there. But again, hobby podcaster, where do you want to put your money? I think that that's a pretty sweet product out there. And mine have lasted me for a while. Yes, again, I have bought parts to keep them going. But I'd rather do that than just throw them out and get a whole new thing. So.
And lastly, let's call out an improvement in regular headphones, particular things like AirPods and other higher quality headphones and earbuds. If you spend a reasonable amount of money on your earbuds or headphones, there's a good chance the caliber will be good enough for you to do some editing on them and hear decent sound. Heck, there's a case to be made that if a lot of people use AirPods, then you're hearing how the podcast sounds on the AirPods might be worth considering. But there are some downsides to consider. First, there's a lag that exists with Bluetooth capability if you're using wireless. This means monitoring live may be a little bit out of the question for you if you start hearing that lag in your ear and you get that slur that you see people speaking funny from time to time. Second, if your earbuds have active noise cancellation on, it's going to cut out portions of what you're hearing back. If you didn't know that, active noise cancellation essentially removes the frequency of your surroundings. And if those frequencies are actually in your podcast, you're not going to be able to hear them. So active noise cancellation is a bad way to monitor back to your podcast. I'll just throw out, if you're actually trying to edit on a plane, it's going to be your best bet, but I've done it before and you're going to miss some things. So just forewarning there. So Stephen, moving on, the next thing that we're going to talk about is speakers and monitors. It's another way to actually hear the audio as you're mixing it. Monitors, when you mix audio, there's a special type of speaker that's designed to help you with flat frequency response, and they're called monitors. Monitor, not your monitor on your computer, but it's called a monitor speaker. If people are stage performers or in the bands, they know what a monitor is. It's a special speaker, basically. In the case of podcasting, monitors are useful to mix the sound in a neutral setting. Yes, you can use your studio monitoring headphones for this, but if you spent hours in the editing bay, you'll want to take them off at some point and use speakers. Both of us use monitors in our studios, but as with the headphones, we acknowledge that there's personal preference and it plays a part in choosing which ones you use, and also budget also contributes. Currently, I use the JBL 305s. I think it's Mark III that I'm currently using. And Stephen, what are you using right now?
An old Speak and Spell that I was given to me.
By ET, right?
Yeah.
Back in 1982?
Yeah, it's either that or Edifier R1010BTs that are connected wired and not Bluetooth. Maybe.
Other monitors that are on our radar include the Yamaha HS series, the KRK Rokit series, and the Genelec series. I think that's how you say it. I did start with the Emma Audio series that aren't sold anymore. They were good for when I started, but I've also had some Mackie stuff. Basically, I gave them to my son to see how he uses them, and they didn't get great reviews, but they'll do if that's all you got. And finally, Stephen, let's talk a little bit about audio treatment.
Yeah, because with audio treatment, that might help improve the quality of your sound. Now, neither of us have actually put in extensive audio treatments into our recording space because we've been able to use our environments with the microphones that we have chosen, and of course created environments that means we didn't need to put a lot of money into audio treatment. So if this is not your case and you want to put a little bit of money into audio treatment, you might have to, depending on the room you're in. Maybe you've got a lot of echo or reverb or whatever. You might need to do that. And we're not going to recommend any specific products, but we want to call this category out as a big change from the last time we talked about it, because it used to be really expensive to find decent quality audio treatment. And yes, there's a lot of crap on the market, but there's a lot of stuff that now is affordable, that is half decent on the market. So you might find yourself something that will work for your audio treatment needs, even if it's something you have to set up behind your microphone every time, or maybe it's something more permanent, like finding some treatment that you put on your walls. There's a lot out there now. And again, that's because of the big boom of podcasting. It's nice to see what is available at a half decent price, at half decent quality.
Now, the last section we're going to talk about is video. And we acknowledge that not every podcast, especially hobby podcast, needs to be video. But if you happen to incorporate video into your show, we're going to talk about it.
Or if your podcast is a video show.
Very clear. Okay, we're going to be clear on this. We're going to keep this section quick, straightforward, and geared toward the average hobby podcaster. Like with audio, there's a ton of upgrades available in the world of video. And you can spend thousands and thousands and tens and thousands of dollars on it, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars with it. But with the current video landscape, including things like YouTube Shorts and TikTok, where non-top tier production quality is extremely normalized, we think hobby podcasters can focus on the more affordable solutions. If you're looking to just do solo video, look no further than your phone. Most modern phones have decent quality cameras that should suffice, even the forward-facing cameras. But if you're doing the solution, you may need to do a little stitching together in the end, such as editing together your phone video with your recorded audio. But if you're using your computer already, you probably are going to look for a webcam. There are some decent webcams on the market that are affordable, including the Logitech C922. Yep, those are still out there. The Logitech StreamCam Plus, the Logitech Brio 4K, the Logitech 4K Pro webcam, and it looks like the Brio. It's a little bit cheaper, has no detachable cord, which I've actually found useful. So presumably some form of lesser equipment, the 4K Pro webcam than the Brio, but it's available. The Elgato Facecam, the Elgato Facecam Mark II, the Elgato Facecam Pro 4K. Man, that sounded like the Rodecaster series right there. And the Razer Tio. Now, if you're somebody wanting to spend more money on upping your video game and you're going to want to spend money on getting a mirrorless camera, And then you're going to end up capturing it through some sort of capture device and probably record on device as well. One of the mirrorless cameras that keeps on coming up is the Sony ZV-E10 or ZV-E10, but there are others available too. Again, come to our Discord and some people might be able to help you out there. As far as the HDMI captures, there's a few available, but the one that's most affordable for hobby podcasters, if you can find it, which it should be findable now, it was not findable during the pandemic, is the Elgato HDMI Cam Link. Now, at this time, Stephen, we're not going to recommend any video switchers dedicated to HDMI-based hardware, right?
Yeah, because while we are big fans of audio hardware recorders and mixers, the thing is, at the moment, it seems a little bit different with the video devices. As a hobby podcaster, you probably don't want to put your budget towards this based off what we're seeing, because it seems like a lot of the video devices that are out there, like video switchers and whatnot, they are plagued with bugs and issues, and you don't want to frustrate yourself as a hobby podcaster. So we think it's actually, in this case, probably more likely that a hobby podcaster who does want to get into things like video switching, like we do here, are probably going to use a computer-based system with software. So we would probably call out the software called OBS. That's available. It's free, and it's available on Windows and Mac. And if you're someone who's like, I don't want to do that, I'm on Windows because it's Windows only, you could also look into XSplit. We looked at that and used that for quite a while on this show. So those are two pieces of software that would allow you to capture that video and either record it to a single file or stream it out like we do for this show. There's a lot of people who do stream using OBS, including gamers, so there's a lot of information out there, which is why we would make it pretty easy for us to recommend. But keep in mind, your hardware needs will be a lot higher as far as what your computer is capable of if you do want to do this.
Some other considerations with video on top of the things that we talked about so far are lighting, backdrop, and a studio set requirements. And you may even consider ways to make the process easier, including an item such as an Elgato Stream Deck. Stephen, a Stream Deck, from what I understand, because I don't have one, is basically a device with a bunch of buttons on it that if you press the button, you get several different things that can happen either separately or together, but you don't have to search for them or click on them or use a mouse or a touchpad or anything. You can just push the button and the events will happen. That's basically what a Stream Deck is, right?
Yeah, and you can do it for video, but also there is some audio production things you can do with it as well, but definitely makes things a lot easier if you decide to get into video.
Yeah, so there's similar products on the market separate from the Elgato Stream Deck right now, but at this time we'd suggest the Stream Deck series since they've proven themselves. It's well compatible, well supported, and we haven't heard too many issues with them on any of the newer or older equipment. Now, the functionality of the Stream Deck will vary slightly between Windows and the Mac, I'm told, and it's slightly more functional on Windows from the audio playback side of things. So take that into consideration. And lastly, you're going to need a way to edit your video. Right now, our suggestions are two. There is DaVinci Resolve, which is free. There's also a paid tier with that. And then Magic Vegas Studio. But quite honestly, we'd recommend starting with DaVinci Resolve and see if that works for you. It's hard to beat for what it is. I just had a fellow producer need to switch off of the Adobe architecture and wanted to find something. I recommended DaVinci Resolve. He tried it out. He was like, it's a learning curve because I've been used to Adobe for so many years, but it was very doable and I appreciate it, especially since it's free versus spending so much monthly on it.
And that's why we didn't put Adobe in there, is because really, as a hobby podcaster, you probably should really think about if you want to lock yourself and all of your project files and everything into that monthly subscription. You might say that, yes, you want to, but at this point, it's hard for us to recommend the Adobe suite to hobby podcasters when there are alternatives out there that work for hobby podcaster needs.
So with all that said, what's the big takeaway from all this? After all, we spent a bunch of time going through a variety of hardware that meets a variety of needs, that costs a variety of prices. How are you going to pare it all down? Well, the reality is you need to start by identifying what your podcast ambitions are, what your requirements are. Are you looking to start a podcast? Are you looking to level up your show? Are you looking to expand or transform your show into something else that might need different gear? What's your future plans? What's the timeline associated with that? And based on that, would it make sense to buy gear now or wait? Then decide what your budget is. How much do you want to spend and how much are you actually comfortable spending? And we made it clear over the years, we think a hobby podcast should be looked at in the same way that other hobbies are. You're likely going to spend some money on them in order to do that. Want to start painting? Buy yourself some consumable supplies. Want to take up golf? Get ready for equipment, membership fees, and plenty of time at the tee. Want to go bird looking? Get ready to invest your time, maybe in some glasses or some camera gear, right? So you have to decide what level you are comfortable investing in your podcast in both equipment and in time. And sometime investing in equipment will save you time. And as a hobbyist, it's not your full-time job. You're going to have to fit it into your free time, basically. So your time could be money to you, basically. We would encourage taking things one step at a time. Can be really easy for you to see a bunch of people doing a full produced podcast with lots of flashy gear like we do sometimes, I guess, and a companion video show and say, I want to do that. You don't need to start there. I definitely didn't. Maybe start with a simpler approach to get used to podcasting. Heck, I started on a chat headset, a USB chat headset. Would I recommended that? No. Heck no. But it's how I started and I'm here now. So if you're looking to involve your podcast, find the middle ground that doesn't involve a full commitment. For example, say you're thinking about adding video to your podcast. Instead of investing in a bunch of video gear, why not pull out your phone and do some live streams while you record? Then go through the motions of editing. See how you feel about the video component for a few episodes before you invest in the equipment and invest your show that this is the direction that it is going. You might find that video isn't for you or for your show. Or perhaps you think you might want to get yourself a more expensive microphone. That gas takes control of you and you're like, I need a better microphone. Maybe you should start by pricing what you think you want, then look at the rest of your podcast development plan and see if there's something else in that plan that you'd rather spend the money towards. We're also fans of the pros and cons list idea. Consider doing one of those before investing in equipment. We talked about podcasting mentoring, 100 episodes or so, if you can find a good one, or come to our Discord server and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? I mean, just today as we're recording this, somebody came in and said, what kind of a podcast media host should I look at considering these things? I mean, it's done all the time, so take advantage of it. So Stephen, if you are a hobby podcaster and your time and money are both precious, what do you say?
Well, take it from a couple of guys that have that aforementioned gear acquisition syndrome. You don't always need to buy the latest thing. Go into your shopping with that in mind. But also keep in mind on the flip side, you might be able to justify it to yourself because it could benefit you in other ways and make your production workflow easier and hopefully more enjoyable, which will thus keep the fun in your hobby podcast. So that's where that pros and list comes into mind, because it might actually be worth spending some of that time and money into upgrading your equipment so that you do keep having fun. Of course, if you have specifics, you can always come to our Discord and ask the community over there and ask us. We do have a good community that has a bunch of different opinions and are happy to share those opinions. So come on over there. People might have recommendations outside of what we talked about today. You can go to betterpodcasting.com/Discord. We love when we see people come there, start talking gear, have our community chime in with a bunch of other thoughts, and have conversation around gear. And generally, the experience to date has been people leave happy with their purchase or lack thereof.
As far as news in the podcasting sphere goes, I just heard about this today. Podcast Addict was removed from the Google Play Store. Apparently, it was violating some policy, a violent extremism or something like that, which I don't know anything about it. I just know that it's been removed. And I think they're going to make some changes and come back. But a lot of people on the Android side were really enjoying Podcast Addict. And now it's removed from the Google Play Store, which is the store that you get it on Android.
I feel like this is deja vu. I feel like a few years ago we ran through this with some other podcast related apps that were on the Apple side of things. I believe we had some stories about that were pulled for violation, and then eventually they went back. Like, that's the problem that always seems to happen here when you do have other content being delivered other than what you control within your app. So I'm interested to see what happens with this, what tweaks are going to be made, and also what it might set up for the future of podcast apps and whether they will survive or be removed from various app stores.
And we will see. That would impact a lot of hobby podcasts that delve into extreme topics. And I'm not talking about extreme topics like throwing over the government or something like that. Some people can think adults like erotica content is extreme content, and that gets pulled. Or maybe some people are just talking about different things going on in the world, and it would be considered extreme. I don't know. So yes, it's definitely a concern. The next news story that I heard about deals with something we talked about last episode of the AI generated podcasts that were using the NotebookLM. So John Spurlock over at Listen Notes put together a list of all the podcasts that he was able to see that were using NotebookLM. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. And there's at least 280 of them, probably more. Of note, there was one noted on Pinecast, Stephen, and I just have to scratch my head and think that maybe the episode that we did by playing it's actually us on Pinecast that was considered the podcast that was using AI generated content. But I don't know. Maybe there's a whole podcast out there that's doing it.
When I saw this article, I didn't put much thought into the method of analyzing, but that really actually, your comment there makes me wonder, like, how are they analyzing all of this? And what's it doing to our downloads? Are they downloading all of these podcasts that are out there to scan them? And so you're using my content for your content creation? Come on now. But anyways, that would be so funny if we did get flagged as the one.
Right. So I know there's talk of using a podcasting 2.0 tag that would identify AI generated content. But there's a whole bunch of issues with that. I mean, if you are doing that and if you don't want to be identified, all you have to do is not put in that tag. So how are you going to be identified? Is somebody going to be the AI cop out there and say, oh no, your podcast has AI generated content in it? So it's all just self-identifying. I just don't see people even if that tag exists, which it doesn't right now, but if it did exist, I just don't see people using it. So I don't know. Again, I came to the realization last episode that the two issues that I'm worried about with hobby podcasting are closed distribution places, or you have pay to play, and AI. And this is an example of AI. We'll see where this goes. 280 confirmed shows at least. And who knows if it's an episode or a whole show. So we'll see that. Stephen, there was a noted free, and I'll put that in quotes, media host that had some issues this past week.
Yeah. So if you are all into browsing the past interweb sphere, you're probably familiar with the site archive.org. Archive.org is it's more than a site. I believe it's like an actual, whatever you call it, organization or collective or whatever that's geared towards archiving internet content. And there are podcasters out there that have hosted their files through archive.org. Basically, they've uploaded them up there and then served them out through other means. Usually their RSS feed won't be on there, but the files themselves, however, will be. And archive.org has been down for a couple of days, apparently due to a DDoS attack. And I do know of at least one podcast that has been affected by this process. And I know of more than one podcast that has hosted their media files on archive.org. So there's not really much you can do in this situation other than wait it out or think about trying to move your media somewhere else. And that means you got to have yourself a backup right now because you can't download it from archive.org. So keep that in mind. Stuff like this can come up. And that's why we would probably recommend that you try to keep your files, if you can, in a single directory. I have to admit, I've gotten really bad about this. I used to have a directory that had all of my individual audio files there that if I needed to, I could just quickly go and upload them into a single directory. And I fell off for a little bit, so I need to get that all caught back up because I like having just a single file folder that's ready to go if I need to upload all of my audio files.
I have the audio files in a single folder for each show. What I don't have is the posts for anything. It's not on a spreadsheet or a Word document or text file or anything like that. For most of the shows, I have it for a couple of shows, but not for the ones that really matter. So that would be a punch in the gut for me. I'd be able to upload the shows, but I'd have to go back to something to get the titles, whether it's our website or something. So there's that. Okay. Let me give you an update talking about my shows on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. We've been talking about the transfer of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the podcast host that shall not be named over to Pinecast. And even though the show has been transferred, I'm going back and I'm verifying all the episodes. I believe last time I said I was up to like episode 365 or something like that. Since we recorded last, which was roughly 10 days ago, I made it up to 406. I did mention that it was going to be slower going forward. I have made forward progress, but it's only up to 406 right now because my time all of a sudden got really compressed of my free time of what I was able to be doing there. So I'm continuing to slog through that. My goal is to get through all of them by the end of October and then to be able to remove that account from the podcast host that shall not be named. I do have one other show, Starling Tribune, which I need to go through it. But if I'm down to one show, I mentioned this last time, it might be months. We'll keep updating everybody as how slow this is going. And this is really relevant to hobby podcasters. You only have so much time. And when you're talking about a show with 530 episodes, it's just going to take some time to verify everything that goes through. Also, really quick, I did an update to my home internet. I have updated or upgraded my main hub in the Eero mesh system from an Eero Pro 6 to an Eero Pro 6E. Hopefully that will assist in some of the internet issues that I might have been having both here in podcasting and throughout the house. I will report back on whether that's moving. Why didn't I do 7? Well, 7's a lot more money. So upgrading to 6E was where I was going. And then finally, in my updates, the StreamYard transition, because that's going to be canceled this next week. I did cancel Restream. I don't know if I said that or not last time around, but I did use the combination of both OBS and Video Ninja to successfully record 2 shows, Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. and an Artie's Addict show. So it's fine. It does have limited streaming capability to it, and we'll talk about that in future, but I was able to get that multi-track audio recording on my computer. So it is available. It's not in the cloud. It is on my computer. So things can go wrong, which is important to have backups, but I do have that ability to have one MKV file with multiple tracks on it and get everybody on their own track. So I can import that into Vegas and it edits up just fine. I still prefer the local audio recordings because the internet can degrade a person from time to time, depending on what their internet connection is or anything else like that. But I think that's where I'm settling on. I know that we were talking about other options like Discord or maybe using a audio only streaming host and recording the video in OBS or something like that. But I think Video Ninja, it's a really cool capability. If that goes down, what will I do? I don't know. Maybe grab StreamYard for a month while I figure out everything. But I'm not going to pay StreamYard $50 a month every month to get the streaming capability, the recording capability, and the multi-track capability when I can get most of that for free with OBS and Video Ninja. So that's where we're at now. And unless I come up with a update to that, I think that puts that one to bed.
Do you know what's cool about Video Ninja? And we haven't talked much about this, is that apparently you can actually run your own instance of it because the files are up on GitHub and everything. So that is something that if all of a sudden Video Ninja went away, in theory, you could spin up your own instance, but I don't know much about the requirements for that and everything. I have no idea, but I do know that that is an open thing. I would like to look into that at some point, but at the moment, just going to video.ninja it works and it's easy.
And also, I just want to point out that if there is a way that I can help crowdfund Video Ninja, I'm going to look into that and throw a few bucks that way, because basically right now I'm saving $10 a month. The $10 that I used to spend on StreamYard, I'm willing to send $5 or $10 over to Video if there's a way to do it.
You can,
okay.
yeah.
I will look into that.
And for those of you that don't know this, it is an opportunity on a lot of these projects that are up on GitHub. A lot of times you can go in and you can put a sponsorship level in there so that you can contribute some money to the creators. I've got a couple in this. Video is one that I do a couple of bucks monthly too to help support.
All
The
right.
last thing in our Better Podnerings that I wanted to mention is OBS related. This is the first week that I'm trying it. For those of you that didn't know this, for many, many years, I have manually at the end of our show document written down all of our different edit points so that when I go and edit, I have time codes of where I need to edit. Well, Scatmaker a while back in our Discord, I think it was maybe at the end of our last season, he had mentioned that there was an update that he saw to OBS where you could now go in and you could tag chapter markers, basically indication of points that you want to call out when you're editing, and you bring it into your DAW, or not even your DAW, to your video editor, and you will see those markers. Well, I finally remembered this last week and then decided to upgrade, and I'm giving that a shot this week. So hopefully I will no longer be needing to actually manually write them down. This will be something that I can do, but I'm coupling it with my Stream Deck because I also realized that on the Stream Deck, which I should have been doing this sooner, there is a add-on that you can put in there to indicate time codes. So if you push a button, it will populate text. Basically, it starts a stopwatch, and it will populate text at that time and basically create you a log in a notepad file. So I could have saved myself a lot of time sooner, but I'm doing both of these things at the same time. So if one of them goes wrong, hopefully the other will be there for me because I am paranoid and I like backups.
Don't we all? All right, Stephen, what did our community have to say?
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
Hi, my name's Stephen Jondrew, and I am a host here on Better Podcasting. And I would just like to fess up to a mistake that I previously mentioned. Or made, I should say. I, in a previous episode, made untrue statements, and I would like to apologize for that. I negatively impacted somebody's character because I called them a cheater.
Ooh.
For those of you that missed it last week, I called Damian a cheater because he commented about checking out Pocket Casts after being such an advocate for Podcast Addict, and I called him a cheater. Well, he came into our Discord and he said, I take offense to being called a cheater. I still haven't actually used Pocket Casts. So he downloaded the app. He just hadn't used it. So Damian, I sit and now kind of awkwardly stand corrected. You are not a cheater yet on your podcast app.
He also responded to our last show, which we were talking about the episode descriptions, and he said he has a website, and I believe this is the actual verbiage that he used. Places to link to images is probably one of the main reasons I have my own external website. Before we were saying you really can't put images beyond your logo in the show notes and files that aren't the actual audio or video file in your RSS feed, and that you would have to put them somewhere and then link to them using your show notes. And he's saying he uses his external website to do that.
And the last piece of feedback that we wanted to call out was a question that one of our listeners had. This was Anthony from Capes on the Couch podcast. And I love this question, and I wanted to call it out. And I think you wanted to as well, because we want our audience's thoughts on this. He goes, here's a question for hosts that also guests on other shows. Do you save a download of the episode somewhere for posterity, or do you just leave it on the RSS feed until it goes down? I'm just curious to see how other people do it. This is a wonderful question, Anthony, and I'm so glad you asked this, because I think I know what SP does. I think he knows what I do. And the bottom line is we both like to download. We both like to download. Now, there is a big difference. And I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm like 99% sure. The difference is that I'm pretty sure SP can actually find where he stored the files. I cannot find where I put mine.
I've actually been slacking off on it recently. I mean, I did a bit for Descript when they were talking about how AI was being used about a year and a half ago or something like that. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I can find that right now. So that's just an example of something that I've done. But most of the podcasts that I've done, I've actually downloaded and have somewhere. Originally, I was using iTunes. I still have that directory of all those podcasts for over the years that is on multiple hard drives right now. But the more recent ones, I don't think I have been as active as putting them in someplace, and I wish I would have, because that is a podcasting resume that could affect your work. If you're going for a promotion or going for a different sort of job or whatever, you can actually point out a variety of different things: your collaboration capabilities, the fact that you have this long work history, whether it's applicable to your work or not. Public relations sometimes is a big in some executive level jobs. And if you can point out the fact that you've done it for years, and here's a list of not only my show, which, let's face it, you can upload a show in a day and you can backdate all the episodes and they wouldn't be none the wiser for it. But if you have a list of other shows and you can actually present them as examples of your work over time, I think it's valuable. So there's a variety of different reasons you can use that. And I know we were talking about on another Discord server, not our Discord server, somebody had guessed it on their first show, and I was trying to pump them up, and just said, "There's no way that you would be any worse than I was with my very first show." And he was like, "Oh yeah, prove it." I was like, "Here you go. Here's my first show." And he's like, "Oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about."
One thing, though, that I will call out in the realm of this, and I will say that I've not been the best of this, although I have generally recorded myself. I would encourage you to at least record yourself if you can when you're recording, because you don't know how that final edit's going to come out. And you obviously are hoping that the people you're guesting for, you know them well enough that there's good faith there. But in the world we live in today, and some of the things that we've seen with people paying consequences for what's out on the internet, it's probably not a bad idea for you to at least record your version of how the recording session went and the things you said before, and hold on to it until the final episode comes out so that you can see how you looked in it. Because if it's edited in a way that you think doesn't reflect you, basically you got the receipts.
Yep, I would agree with that. But I would be interested in hearing what our audience has to say about this question that Anthony asked. So if you do have an answer to that, you can either give us feedback or go to our Discord server in the Better Podcasting channel and tell Anthony what you would do or what you have done. And I'm sure I will find some very interesting answers back. If it's a list on a website or, whatever it is, I'm interested to hear what other long-term podcasters have done.
So that's going to take us towards the end of our show. SP, are you shocked at all that we talked about gear, and we talked a lot about gear today?
No. And one of the things is, A, I was responsible for a lot of the show notes, and B, I did do a dry run through it, and I started talking faster and faster and faster and faster to get through it. And I knew it was going to run long, but I didn't want to dissuade you. So thank you very much to everybody that is all the way at listening all the way at the end. We really appreciate that.
So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for episode number 306 of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen saying, is this how we actually recorded it? I don't know. Maybe I made a dodgy edit. You should watch us live.
And I'm SP, and I'm excited for next time that we're going to be talking about podcast trends. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, Please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.